That it's called the Kabbalah of meaning is because as we go along, we're going to tap into some of the mystical secrets of Jewish wisdom that give us a better understanding of meaning. Another thing that I'd like to also say as an introduction, besides welcoming each and every one of you here and those that are listening in and watching by Zoom, it's very nice to have you here, is that this is a course in stages. It's not going to be that in the first class tonight, we're going to be able to reach the whole purpose of meaning, but rather it gives us an introduction of how to look at the concept of meaning. So I want to just start with the general concept. In order to understand the idea of meaning, we have to understand the lack of meaning as well. We live in a very unique time when there's an abundance of wealth, there's an abundance of health, there's an abundance of personal freedom, and there's just a tremendous amount of information available for all of us. And yet, I would say that the concept of meaning still remains elusive. People are still looking for it. People feel that there is a void in their life and they want to know how to fill that void. So we're going to start by exploring that. And as I said earlier, we're not going to have all the answers in one session, but we're going to start looking at how the Torah wisdom actually sees it. So I'm going to ask you all to open up your textbooks onto page 3. Now, we're going to read the opening line of a very famous biblical book known as Kohelet. In English, it's called Ecclesiastes. It's on page 3. Now, this book was written by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. Now, Shlomo HaMelech was the son of King David, and he lived in Jerusalem some 3,000 years ago. And he brought in an era of peace and abundance to Israel. In fact, it says that it was in his era that people lived comfortably, each one under their vine or fig tree, and they just had a tremendous amount of peace. And not only that, all the countries, not only in the Middle East, but in Africa and Asia, sent their people to come to meet the king and to be one, at peace with him. So King Solomon lived at a very, very special time. Another thing about King Solomon was that he was considered to be one of the smartest people in the world. And there's a story about that as well. It says that after his father David passed away, he was asked by God, what does he want? Does he want to have wisdom? Does he want to have wealth? And his response was that if I have wisdom, then I will have everything. And God bestowed him with a tremendous amount of wisdom. Now, he was wise beforehand as well. It wasn't that he was a fool and God just waved a magic wand and all of a sudden he became wise. He was already a wise person, but he had a deeper insight. And it's referred to as the Solomonic wisdom. The most famous story with him is with the 2 mothers that came with 1 child. So everybody knows that story, right? That's the old version of the story because there's a newer version where there were 2 women fighting over 1 guy for their daughter. And the king said, I'm going to use Solomonic wisdom as well. And we'll split the guy in half. And one of them said no, and the other one said yes. And Rabbi said, the one that said yes, that's the mother-in-law. So that's the way it's the manifestation of today, just to have a little bit of a lighthearted approach. But he was very, very wise. The 3 books that he wrote that he's famous for, the first book is called Shir HaShirim, which is a Song of Songs. And that is a romance between a bride and groom. And he wrote it as a metaphor to describe the love between God and Israel and God. So it was metaphoric, but it shows the true idea of love. In fact, the famous verse, Ani l'dodi v'dodi li, I am to my beloved and my beloved is to me, comes from that particular book. The second book that he wrote is the book of Mishlei, which is known in English as Proverbs. And that is where he uses metaphoric examples of wisdom in life. And in fact, Proverbs is one of the most quoted books when it comes to wisdom. The third book that he wrote was the book of Ecclesiastes. And yet, after all of his wisdom, he starts Ecclesiastes in a very, very strange way. It's almost like a sad way. So if you look at page 3, let's see what he writes. So text 1. The words of Kohelet. The word Kohelet means to assemble, someone that was an assembler. The word Kohelet comes from the Hebrew word kahal, which means a group or a congregation, and he congregated the people of Israel. So he called himself Kohelet. Kohelet, the son of David, king of Jerusalem. And he writes the following. In Hebrew, it's Hevel Avalim Omer Kohelet, Hevel Avalim Akol Hevel. In English, it is futility of all futilities, said Kohelet. Futility of all futilities, all is futile, all is futile. What profit has man in all his toil that he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but only the earth endures. This is the sort of the graphic for that. So what's he trying to say over here? After all the wisdom that he had discovered and explored and taught, he comes to the realization that human life in the scope of the entire universe is very, very limited. So a person can toil under the sun, because remember, it was an agrarian society. People were working in the farms. They work from morning till night. And then the generation comes, the generation goes. The only thing that lasts forever is the earth. And what have they accomplished in their life? So this is an expression of wisdom where someone is looking for meaning. What's the meaning of my life? And this is something which is actually very, very important, because it's not just the productivity that we want to feel of our work. We want to feel that we have meaning in life. And if all we do is the same thing and we work every day or we study every day, where do we get with that? And that was his question. What makes matters even more interesting is that the human capacity for abstract thought allows us to be sensitive to higher things, which we are soon going to see the difference of the distinction between a human and an animal. We'll get there in a minute. It also comes from King Solomon's writings. But nevertheless, if we lack meaning, we actually feel the void, and that can cause depression. The famous father of analytical psychology, Carl Jung, once said that about a third of his cases that suffer from anxiety are not from any kind of clinical definable neurosis, but aimlessness, senselessness, that they don't know what meaning they have in life. So as we're going to see in text 2, not that we want to belabor the point, but it's a fact. This was written recently by a PhD known as Lisa Miller, and she writes the following. Text 2 on page 3. Depression, anxiety, and substance abuse have reached epidemic proportions globally. In 2017, 66.6 million Americans, more than half of the respondents on the national survey on drug use and health, reported binge drinking within the past month, and 20 million met the criteria for substance use disorder. 31% of American adults will develop a full-blown anxiety disorder at some point in their lives, and 19% in any given year. The World Health Organization reports that 264 million people on the planet are depressed. Depression is the third most costly disability worldwide. Each year, 17 million American adults are depressed. Over 16% of youth in late adolescence currently face depression. And the impact of depression on suicide accounts for the second leading cause of death in adolescence, rivaled only by by death from auto accidents. While the stakes of our mental health crisis are truly life and death, many of us also suffer from less debilitating, though still painful conditions: burnout, chronic stress, trouble concentrating and connecting, loneliness, isolation, lives that are rich in many ways, yet feel somehow narrow, hollow, and cut off. Even when we experience success and satisfaction, we may sense that there is more to happiness, that life can be more joyful, rewarding, and meaningful. Which is very interesting, that we live in one of the best times in the history of humanity. And yet, as Viktor Frankl once noted, that evermore today people have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. Remember, what was the name of his book? Man's Search for Meaning. And he went through the Holocaust, and he was able to say that the only way you can survive even the worst of the atrocities and the worst of conditions is through having meaning. And as we're going to see in the next one, purpose, because we're not going to talk about purpose tonight. As I said at the outset when we first started tonight, that this is a course that doesn't go with one answer. It's not looking for one answer. It's trying to build a case. So today we're not going to talk about purpose. We're going to talk about meaning. So we're going to look at the Torah to see how the Torah views that. And the question is, how do we find meaning? So if you go to page 78, you will see something very, very interesting. And that is that in order for us to achieve some sort of meaning, we have to be aligned. So in order to understand what is our core, there's an exercise here. You don't have to say it loud. You can write it for yourself if you want, or at least mentally think about it. Now, I just want to say that I want to distinguish between meaningful experiences and pleasurable experiences. Now, it doesn't mean that meaningful experiences can't be pleasurable, but it does mean that pleasurable experiences are not always meaningful, and it also means that meaningful experiences are not always pleasurable. So in this exercise on page 6, we have, I'm sorry, I said 78, page 6. Okay, sorry for throwing you off there. Page 6, describe at least one activity that brings you pleasure and that you find meaningful. So you have both pleasure and meaningful. You have to describe it to yourself, unless you want to announce it to everybody. Then it asks you to describe at least one activity that brings you pleasure, but you do not find meaningful. And then you can describe one activity that you might find meaningful, but it doesn't bring you pleasure. If you want to share it, it's fine. If not, everybody can figure out in their own life what is meaningful and both meaningful and pleasurable. What can be pleasurable, but it doesn't necessarily mean bring you the meaningful experience, and some things which are meaningful, but you don't necessarily find it pleasurable. I think each and every one of us can relate to that, because this is something that we experience regularly. Hopefully, the experience that you have here is both meaningful and pleasurable, so you can write that as the first.
Up to you.
Okay, if you look up on the board, you will see two statements. One is that if you have alignment with your core, then you can find meaning in life. But if you have misalignment, then you feel empty. Let's talk about this on a very, very basic level. We're not even going to go yet in the deep level. Basic level. Let's say someone has a great talent for art, and they can really express feelings and concepts on canvas, but it's not going to bring them any money because the economy is not there for the art at the time. So they get an office job, So even though they're in the office job and they're productive and they're making money, but they don't necessarily find meaning in what they're doing, except that they're earning a living, right? And imagine all of a sudden there's an opportunity for them that they can do their art and actually earn money from that instead of working the office job. So suddenly they feel meaning because they're aligned with their core. They feel this is something where their talents are. We can find many, many examples like that. You find sometimes people that by nature they're nurturing and they love to help people and they can't get a job except if they go into the corporate world, where in the corporate world is so competitive and nobody feelings are thrust out of the window when you go to the corporate world. And all of a sudden they're going against their nature. And then they're offered a job to care for somebody that needs help and they can earn money in that and they feel that it's meaningful. So again, the idea is that you have to be aligned with our core. The question is, what is our core? And that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. What is the core? And it's very interesting that we're not just going to talk about each individual. We're going to talk about the generic human being. And we find a very, very interesting statement in the Torah in the book of Deuteronomy, which makes a statement which you might think that the statement is just a statement in passing, but in reality, it is considered to be a cornerstone in Jewish philosophy. And we actually have a holiday that's associated with this verse. So if you look at page 7, text 3, so it's talking about a time of war. And we're not celebrating war here because the focus is not on the war. Let's say when you besiege a city for many days, there's an enemy that comes and attacks you, and you have to go and conquer the city, right? So you're waging war to capture it. So it says, do not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them. For from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down. Basically, the story is this way, that when you are conducting a war, you are not permitted to cut down trees. What we learn later from the verses is fruit-bearing trees, because the fruit-bearing trees are there for us to enjoy. And if you cut down fruit-bearing trees, you're not going to have the food for yourself or anyone else. But if it's a non-fruit-bearing tree, and we'll talk soon about what the definition of a fruit is, then you have permission, if you have no choice, to cut it down. But then the Torah throws in a very strange statement, and it says, for the tree of the field is human, that you should besiege it. So these are Moses' words. What is the meaning that a human is like a tree in the field? Why is the Torah saying it? Can anyone come up with an answer? What? Right, but why compare a human to it? You already said the statement that if it bears fruit, you can't cut it down. And if it doesn't bear fruit, if you need to, you have no other choice, you can cut it down. So what's the addition over here of comparing a tree to a human or a human to a tree? Yes. Okay, you're getting into a different question. That we're going to do in a minute. Your question is, what is the similarity between humans and trees? That's not what my question is. My question is, why is this coming up here? Yes.
Well, they endure the seasons, they contribute to society, and they provide shade.
Okay, Sheila, you're not understanding my question. My question is not whether there's a comparison between trees and humans. We're going to get to that in a minute. The question is, why is this mentioned here? What is the simple meaning? And I'll take one more and then we'll go on.
In Judaism, we make the Torah tree, the tree of life, hold to it fast.
Again, you're telling me that the Torah says the tree is a tree of life. We're all talking about the virtue of the tree. And the question is, why is the Torah saying it? And we'll get to that in a minute. The most simple answer is that the Torah is saying, when you are fighting with a soldier that's going to kill you, of course, you want to cut them down. But a tree is not a human that's going to harm you, so why do you want to cut it down? That's the simple meaning. But when you look in the Talmud says, no. This is not what it's saying over here. It's giving you another instruction here. It's a standalone statement. And the standalone statement is that the tree in the field is a human being, and the human being is a tree in the field. And once we understand the characteristic of a tree, we can understand the characteristic of a human being. Now, it doesn't mean we're totally like a tree, and it's not meant as an example, but it means to say that there is similarities between us and a tree and what we have to learn. So much so that the tree is so important that we have a holiday for it, and that holiday is known as Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of Shvat, when we celebrate the tree. And we'll talk about that in a minute, why that is a holiday, what the meaning of that is. So let's give a look. Before we go on, I want everybody to go back and now give me the answer of why do you think that there's similarities between trees and human beings? So you gave an answer before. There are some that are fruit-bearing, some that are not fruit-bearing. Is that correct? Okay. Cheryl, what was your statement?
Trees have roots, and we also have roots when baby, and then we also have leaves where we spread out.
Trees have roots, which means that we humans also have roots. And the roots are our ancestry, where we come from, and leaves is something which gives shade. Okay.
I think the roots are the roots what calls us living. No?
The roots are our principles, and that feeds into the belief system. Very good. And in fact, we find that the Mishnah says that a tree that has deep roots can withstand a strong wind. And a tree that doesn't have deep roots, even though it might be a big, beautiful tree, but if a strong wind comes, it can knock it over. Those of you that survived Hurricane Hugo here in Charlotte in 1989 will remember that there were many beautiful big trees that had tiny roots, and when the hurricane came through, it uprooted them. So we didn't know that they were weak trees until we saw the weak roots. So there are similarities. There's many other similarities, but we're going to, all of these are correct, but we're going to see what the Talmud says. But I want to focus on these things that you see on the board. Number one, which is very important, a tree does not wander. In other words, a tree is alive only if it's connected to its source. So I want to stop on that for a moment, and then I'll go to the other four. It doesn't mean that we can't wander, but it means that we always have to remember that we're connected to a source. What is the connection to the source? The source is the source, the energy that flows from God that gives us the ability to live. I remember once walking with my young son. He was here before when he was a very young child, and we were hiking in the woods, and it was after Hurricane Hugo. So there were trees that had been felled, but they were never cleaned up, and the leaves on it were brown. And he wanted to know, why is it that the trees that are on the floor sleeping have brown leaves, and the trees that are standing tall have green leaves? So I told him, because the trees that are down are dead, so their leaves dried up. So he asked me, what does dead mean? So it gave me an opportunity to explain that what does alive mean? Alive means that you have the divine energy that's in you, the soul that God gave us, which is constantly receiving the flow of energy from above, and it keeps us alive. The moment we get disconnected, we die. And that's what happened to the tree. When the tree is rooted in the ground, you see it, it's visible, that because it's rooted in the ground, it's receiving its energy and its flow of energy from the ground, it stays alive. The moment it's disconnected, it starts to dry up and the leaves turn brown. So this is one metaphor that's very important for us, because we tend to think of ourselves as independents. We tend to think of ourselves as self-made. It's all about us. And we forget that there is this invisible lifeline that's flowing from above, just like when it says when God breathed into the first human beings, Adam and Eve, the life, the breath of life, which was their soul, through their nostrils, and that keeps them alive. that this is happening now as well. That's why in Judaism, every morning when we wake up, the first prayer that we say is Moda ani lefanecha. I offer my thanks before you. Shechazarta li nishmasi, that you have returned to me my soul. Because the soul was at a very shallow level when I was sleeping. When I awake, it comes back in full force. Okay. But I want to turn your attention to the 4 items that are on the other side, because that's very important. There are 4 characteristics of the tree that we'd like to focus on, which this is the truth about human beings. The number 1 is growth, which we call personal growth. Number 2 is productivity. Number 3 is giving. And number 4 are relationships. And what we're going to do with the rest of the time for the next hour until our time is up is actually delve into these 4 areas. What does it mean, personal growth? What does it mean to have productivity? What does it mean to be giving? And what does it mean to have relationships? So in order to understand personal growth, we're going to read another strange statement in the Talmud. Now remember, the Talmud is not only a collection of laws, it's a collection of dialogue, but there's also a lot of collection of wisdom that's found in the Talmud. And this is from the Talmud Tractate Tainit, page 7a. We are actually on page 10, text 4. So the Gemara asks, the Talmud asks the question, what is the meaning of the verse, for the tree of the field is a human? Is man actually a tree of the field? So the Talmud answers, because earlier in the same verse it is written, for from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down. And it is written in the next verse, however, if it is a tree that you know that it is not a food tree, you may destroy it and cut it down. Before we go on, remember it's talking about warfare. One of the things they had to do is build ladders so they could be able to reach above the walls of the city. Where are they going to get the wood for the ladders? They're going to get it from the trees. So therefore the Torah is saying that if you're going to cut down a tree to make a ladder, make sure that you don't cut a fruit-bearing tree, but you can only cut a non-fruit-bearing tree. And then you can destroy it. So it doesn't mean that you can just go destroy any tree. There is a reason why you're destroying the tree. But even if you have a reason, it can only apply to the non-fruit-bearing trees. So this indicates that there are certain trees that may be cut down, what others may not be destroyed. So how so? So the Talmud answers, if a Torah scholar is worthy, from them you shall eat, and you shall not cut them down. But if he's not worthy, you may destroy and cut down. What are we talking about over here? You have to actually learn with Rashi, because Rashi is the main commentator. So what he's saying doesn't mean to cut down that you kill a scholar that is not appropriate, but it means that you cut them off, that you don't have a connection with them. But the one that is a worthy scholar, which is a tree with fruit, you actually do have a connection to them. By the way, this, just parenthetically, this whole idea of not cutting down trees, even trees that are non-fruit-bearing trees, unless there is a need, brings us to a Jewish adage, which is called Bal Tashchit. You should not destroy wantonly. So one does not destroy, one doesn't throw away food unless it's spoiled. One doesn't destroy property because there's a prohibition against that, unless they're destroying in order to build. So this comes from that. But what has it got to do with the sages, and why does the Talmud use the story of a worthy sage and an unworthy sage as an example for the tree? We just heard wonderful illustrations from people here in this room of what the comparison is between a human and a tree, and yet none of that comes up here. The only thing is about a scholar, whether the scholar is worthy or not. And then the question is, what does it mean, a scholar that is worthy? Have you got that question? So before we go to the answer, we're going to go to the concept of growth. One of the things that we learn from trees, that trees continuously grow. And the desire for personal growth, it's actually, there's a psychological name for it. It's called Personal Growth Initiative, or PGI. It describes the person's active and intentional involvement in changing and developing themselves as human beings. Self-actualization, self-development. So that's one thing that we learn from a tree, that a tree is constantly growing. A tree grows taller and taller and taller. It also speaks about the human spirit. So what is this about the growth? So here we're going to go back to Ecclesiastes. Now, this is a very revolutionary statement, and it may be counterintuitive to some people, especially those that bond with animals, but it's not to negate that, but it's actually to be honest with what the difference between humans and animals are. So in text 5 on page 11, we learn about something which is called the ascending spirit. So King Solomon says, how many understand that the spirit of human ascends on high, while the spirit of the beast descends to the earth? What does that mean? A lot of people believe that humans are just sophisticated animals. We have evolved into complex primates, and there's no superiority of the human over the animal. This goes contrary to what the Torah says, because after the Torah speaks about the creation of Adam and Eve, it says you should dominate the world. It doesn't mean we should mistreat animals. On the contrary, we're not permitted to mistreat animals. We have to be kind to animals. But at the same time, we have to understand that there's a very big difference. So one of the major differences is that the human spirit constantly strives to go higher and higher. The animal is always focused on survival. When you look at an animal, what's an animal doing? An animal in the field is constantly grazing, it's eating. So a dog always goes with its nose to the ground trying to find something. But even livestock are like that, and most animals, or even hunting animals, what they do with their clever power is to be able to survive, right? That is really the concept of an animal, but a human being is not that. A human being is not just about self-indulgence, and it's not just about survival. A human being is trying to rise to a higher level. And the first step in reaching a higher level is to master the inner animal, the animal within. So in order to illustrate this better, in Hasidic philosophy, in the very first book from Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he says that every human being has a dual soul. Part of the soul is the animal soul, the animalistic soul within us, and the other part of the soul is the divine soul. The animalistic soul is the part of us that is always looking for self-indulgence. And self-indulgence doesn't mean prohibited actions. It doesn't mean doing things that are terrible, but it means doing things that just give us physical satisfaction without any other purpose. It's just for the purpose of having pleasure. And then there's the divine soul. The divine soul is aspiring always to rise. Now, in the divine soul, there's also before that the spiritual soul. Now, let's not confuse spiritual with divine, because spiritual comes from the word spirit. And the spirit is to rise upwards. We want to hear nice music. We want to view nice art. We want to explore something that is beyond us. We want to engage in intelligent conversation. We want to do research. We want to invent. We want to innovate. All of that is how the spirit of the human rises upwards. The divine soul is actually trying to soar higher and be one with God. So we have to accept that the idea when we talk about personal growth, which we're learning from a tree, the idea of growing, to translate it and interpret it within human behavior, it means to grow above the ground and to soar to greater heights. And this brings us to a very interesting way of looking at humanity. And we're going to do it by studying a Yiddish word, because you know that there are some Yiddish words that have actually infiltrated within the English language. And one of the most common ones is the word mensch. Mensch. Now, the literal Yiddish translation of the word mensch means a person. But when you're saying the word mensch, what does it mean? So give a look on page 11. If you give a look at the mensch definition from Webster's dictionary, so it says a person of integrity and honor. Now, I have to say that that wasn't the original meaning of mensch. The original meaning of mensch is just a human being, a person. If you speak pure Yiddish and you see a person walking to the street, you say, oh, dog geht a mensch. Here's where a person is walking. But mensch has become sort of like the idea of a great human being. But we're going to read something from a contemporary of ours, a friend of mine actually, from Chabad in New Jersey, Rabbi Mendy Herson, that he wrote an article once for Chabad.org, and he contrasts the idea of mensch to human. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because it goes back to the idea of growth that we were just talking about. The easy read. So if you go to page 12, let's talk about this. Okay, following so far? Very good. So the title of his article is Mensch or Human. So let's look at it closely. What is the Torah definition of a human? A human has the capacity for self-assessment. Okay, that's being aware, self-aware, being honest with your self-assessment. A human has the mental and moral capacity to override impulse, which an animal doesn't have that. An animal acts only on impulse. A human can choose to follow his or her moral compass instead of the physical inclination. A human can calculate consequences beyond the immediate. That is the Torah description of a human, the Torah definition of a mensch, something we should all strive for. So in other words, growth is not just a matter of indulgence. Growth is actually refining our spirit, which sometimes it means to contain the indulgence and to contain the animal within. Then he continues, interestingly, the term has different connotations when it's used in the American parlance. When a person is weak and less than noble, impulse-driven instead of morally focused, what do we say? Listen, he's only human. Just the opposite of what we just said is mensch. In our vernacular, recognizing that a person is human is acknowledging his inherent weakness. We see a human as inherently flawed and morally feeble. We cut a guy slack because we know he can't reach a noble goal. After all, he's only human. What can you really expect from this person of flesh and blood? Think about it. The Torah Jewish term of human, mensch, which is ish, is something to strive for, while the American human is a fallback position in case of moral failure. Okay? So what is the meaning of a human according to Torah? Is the ability to transcend our nature. Now, I have to say, this idea of the separation between humans and animals is something which is very important, because you can teach an animal a lot of things. There's a famous story with one of the great sages. Some say it was Maimonides. I read it that it was Rabbi Yonasan Apeshitz, who was a friend of a great governor in his day in Europe. And this governor was very wealthy, and he had this beloved cat. And he trained the cat in being able to lift goblets of wine off a tray and hand it to people to a drum roll. And to make it even more interesting, he had the cat wear a vest and a bow tie. See, there we have the drum roll. Okay. But we don't have the cat. Rabbi Yonasan Apeshitz argued with this man that an animal is an animal, and as much as you train it, it's still dominated by its impulse. And he said, no, we can train all of us to be the higher level because we're basically originated from primates. And the rabbi said, no, we were created as humans. If you look in the Torah, we're not descendants of primates. We're not descendants of animals. Well, one day the rabbi was deep in study, and he had a little gold box on his table, which had what they used to call snuff tobacco. It was like a spice that they used to sniff to wake themselves up in the JLI classes, right? And one day as he was there, a little mouse hopped on and got into the spice box, and he closed the lid. Now, he came with the spice box to this party where this governor had all assembled, and the cat was going to come and do its thing. And as the cat is in the middle of the hall with one paw it's holding a tray and the other paw it's gingerly lifting the crystal with the wine in it, the rabbi quietly slipped out the little box, the little case, and he opened the lid, and out jumps a frightened mouse. So what do you think the cat did? Down goes all the crystal and the vest and everything, and he did what a cat does and took chase after the mouse. So he was trying to prove that an animal is, even if it's trained because it knows it'll get a reward. It's all part of its impulse. A human being can transcend its nature because a human being understands that there is something which is much deeper. Sorry, 1 second. I just want to see if I can mute it. Yeah, it's not working. Anyways, so the idea is that this self-control is something which is very, very powerful because it allows us to grow in a beautiful way. So even though we can act in a manner which is antithetical to our natural instincts, but nevertheless, we bring out something which is fine, which is finer. So they say that there are certain acts in life that you have to have a refined taste for it, like going to listen to classical music. Now, if you're going to go to a teenager and play for them classical music, they'll say that's the most boring thing we have ever heard. But if you go to someone that's intellectual and studied music and understands the nuances and the movements, the richness of the classical music is much greater than just the rhythmic, impulsive kind of music. The same thing is true with wine. So some people just like the sweet wine, which is sweet to their palate. But people that develop a taste for the real wine taste, so how do they do that? It's rising above their natural instincts. And humans have the ability to do that. Humans have the ability that if they're stingy, they can become giving. If they're judgmental, they can teach themselves how to be non-judgmental. It takes effort, but we have the ability to do that. And that is considered to be growth. And only humans were given that ability to be able to stand on a higher level. And that is really the expression of our humanity, of who we are as a human. So going back to human, in Judaism, human is the highest level. And I want to say this, that the Torah says that the choice creation was the human being. And it doesn't mean it in a chauvinistic way that that's why we should deserve everything and everything should be given to us hand over foot. But it means that's why we have a responsibility to the rest of creation to elevate it and to refine it. In fact, the Talmud says that every person is obligated to say, for my sake, the world was created. Now, you can look at it two ways. You can say, for my sake, the world was created. So everything is there up for grabs and I can use anything I want. But that's not what the meaning of the statement is. The meaning of the statement is just the opposite. For my sake, the world was created that if you see something that is in disrepair, don't wait for someone else to do it. You get involved. And if you can't do it, find someone that can do it. You know, it's like the story with the rabbi and the coachman that came to spend Shabbat in a village. And the coachman tried to play rabbi, and he put on a nice Shabbat suit, and he went to the synagogue. And the rabbi was a little late, and all of a sudden he hears another coachman screaming, I'm stuck in the mud with my coach. He's never trained and never learned how to pull a coach or horses out of the mud, but he wanted to do the right thing. So he jumped in to be able to help. The result was neither could he pull out the coach, but he had his suit and coat torn, and he came back muddy and full of scratches. Doesn't mean that you have to do it, but you have to find the right person to do it. But the fact that you see it, you know that that is there for you to fix. So let's go back to what the Talmud is saying here. When the Talmud is speaking about a tree with fruits, it's talking about us, that we can have fruits. And the fruits are being worthy and nice to other people and training ourselves how to live a better life. So you can have someone that has a lot of knowledge and they're the greatest expert in all of the material, but they're not a mensch. They're not a mensch. And there's this famous story that there was a rabbi that had to leave a congregation and he was trying to look for another job. So they wrote for a reference letter and they said he's an angel. So they hired him right away. And when they saw that he was so not nice to people, so they wrote back to the congregation and said, why did you give such a nice recommendation? He said, we didn't give a nice recommendation. We were trying to say that he's not a mensch, so we used the word angel. So the idea is a mensch is that you have to have someone that when they study and they learn, they internalize it, and it actually effectuates a change within themselves, that it's not just the knowledge. This is very, very important. I just want to share another story with you. There was a great rabbi, his name was Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev, and he was looking for a teacher for his children in the city of Berdichev, which is in the Ukraine, to establish a little school. And there was a very knowledgeable person that came, and he thought he was very eligible. And after the rabbi interviewed him, he said, I'm not taking you. And he took somebody else. So he came back and he says, why didn't you hire me? So he says, because your actions don't follow your knowledge. He says, what does it make the difference? The knowledge I have, all I am required to do is to teach. They'll have the knowledge. And the rabbi said, so in other words, the children will learn from you. Have the knowledge, but don't act. I'm sorry, that's not what we want. We want that someone that has the knowledge to be able to act with the knowledge. So this is what the Torah is saying, that if you have a tree that is hagun, which means that he's a mensch, a scholar that is a mensch, then eat from his fruits. Don't destroy him. Don't cut off relations. But if it's someone that may have all the knowledge, but they are not acting in a decent way, they're not acting in a proper way, and they haven't refined themselves, stay away from them. Okay? That's the meaning of that. So now we come to page 13. The exercise for yourself. In which ways have you grown and improved as a human being? And which areas, the second question is, which areas can use improvement? And the third question is, what ways to implement that in your life? And that you can answer to yourself. Okay, so we finished the first of the 4 subjects, and that was growth. So the idea of growth is self-refinement, reaching for higher, and making that part of our life. So the next time you say, I want to read a book, or I want to go to the theater, think before, what am I going to gain from it, and what is it going to do for me? What am I going to learn from it, and how can I internalize the message from this book or from going to this theater that will make me a better person? But if I'm just doing it for self-indulgence, that's not a mensch activity. A mensch activity is to be able to grow from it. Okay, the second item that we have is something which is called productivity. So this is a very interesting thing. Yes.
Part of it also trying to study Torah. Like if you go to Shabbat service, then you go back to your house and then you try to understand what it says. Is that part of growth too?
Absolutely. If someone goes to the synagogue and listens to the Torah and then wants to internalize 100%, that's growth. So now we're going to go to productivity. So what is productivity? So I want to go back to the trees. Remember we mentioned that there is one holiday that's associated with a tree, and that's the 15th of Shvat, and it's called Tu B'Shvat. This is an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about it because I have a little bit of a gripe about it as well, the way people see it. Why do we celebrate the New Year for trees? And by the way, where does the New Year from trees come from? Where do we learn about the New Year of trees? Does anyone know? So there is a tractate in the Talmud The Talmud is the set which we're talking about. And by the way, if you look in that bookcase there, next to where Rabbi Cohen is sitting, straight from here all the way down, all those books, those are all part of the Talmud. They're translated into English with commentary, but it was originally written in Hebrew and Aramaic. So there's one tractate there, that tractate is called Rosh Hashanah. And we all know what Rosh Hashanah is, right? That's when we go to the synagogue. We have to suffer through the sermon of the rabbi. We also we hear the shofar and all of that. Okay. But it's interesting that the Mishnah starts with the words, there are 4 Rosh Hashanah. There's the Rosh Hashanah for the New Year's, which we all know about. And then it speaks about 3 others. And one of them is the Rosh Hashanah for the trees that is on the 15th of Shvat. There are 2 opinions. One opinion is that the first day of Shvat, but the conclusion is the 15th day of Shvat, because that's when the trees start filling up with sap in the land of Israel. What's the practical application of Rosh Hashanah for the trees? So if you know, we spoke about it on Shabbat. In Israel, there's a law of tithing produce, which means that 10% of the fruits and the wines and all of that have to be given to the Levite. And there were 2 tithings. There was a tithing that was given to the Levite, then there was a tithing that we had to take it to Jerusalem, or some years give it to the poor. Now, when it comes to paying taxes, for instance, the way it's set up in most countries is it goes according to the calendar year. So even though we have to pay the taxes by April 15th, but it's based on the calendar year that starts January 1 and it ends December 31st. When you talk about the tithing of the fruits of the trees, when does the year start? The year starts the 15th of Shvat. So if you have produce that was from before the 15th of Shvat, that goes for the previous year. If you have produce that came after the 15th of Shvat, it goes for the next year. So the whole idea of the 15th of the Shvat, that it's the new year, that's when it starts the cycle again, because that's when the sap comes in. Now, I want to make a bet with you that if you will ask most celebrants in Israel or abroad of what is Tu B'Shvat, they're not going to say this answer. They're going to say it's Jewish Arbor Day, it's a time of planting trees. But most people are not going to say it has to do with the tithing. But nevertheless, the question is, why do we make a holiday out of it? And it's a major holiday. We don't say the Tachnun prayer. In the Sephardic communities, they actually have a Seder where they drink 4 cups of wine. There's prayers that are recited in this day. We eat new fruits, especially the fruits that Israel has been praised with. We make a big deal about it, and it's a special holiday. Why this Rosh Hashanah more than the others is because of the statement that we read before, that the human is like the tree in the field. Yet, what are we celebrating? Are we celebrating the tree, or are we celebrating its fruits? And the answer is we're celebrating the fruits, because the whole purpose of the tree is the fruit. So give a look the way the Rebbe puts it in text 7. A tree, by definition, is meant to produce fruit. Like the verse says, a tree that produces fruit. It's called in Genesis, what we read Simchas Torah, it says, Eitz osopri. It's a tree that produces fruit. That means that it grows fruit in a way where there is seed within it, meaning that each fruit contains seed that can grow into another tree. This idea is underscored by the New Year for trees on the 15th of Shvat, because the halakhic importance of this day is all about the tree's fruits. As Rashi explains, we don't combine fruits that ripened before the 15th of Shvat with those that ripened after when calculating the tithes, which I just explained before. So in other words, the tree's true value is not measured by how tall it is or how lush the leaves are, except if you need it for shade or you need it for oxygen. But generally, the quality of a tree is based on the quality of its fruits. And that's why we celebrate Tu B'Shvat more than by planting trees. We celebrate it by eating the fruits. And the fruits have to be good fruits, fruits that are healthy. If you can eat an apple, it's going to be a healthy apple, not a crab apple. because it wants to be, it has to be something that we can enjoy, something that gives us the nutrients that we need. What does this mean to us? It means to us that a tree, in order for it to be productive, needs to have these good fruits. So it also speaks to us about us. In order to be a human and to have meaning in life, we have to be productive. What does productive mean? Some people, productive means they go to work and they earn a livelihood so they can take care of themselves and their family. So let me ask you a question. If somebody won a lottery and they don't need to go to work to earn money, or if they had an inheritance where they came into a lot of money, does that mean that they don't have to be productive? So the answer is the opposite. The answer is yes, we have to be productive. Productivity is all about it. In fact, the reason that God made it that we have to earn our livelihood through work is because that's what makes us productive. We're going to use an example. We're going to introduce you to another thing about trees. There's a mitzvah in the Torah which is called Orla. Orla is spelled O-R-L-A-H. It's true for trees in Israel and trees outside of Israel, but there's a leniency with trees that are outside of Israel. But it's a law in the Torah. What does the Torah say? When you plant a tree, you're not permitted to eat its fruits for the first 3 years. And after the first 3 years, on the 4th year, you're to take all the fruits to Jerusalem and enjoy it there with friends and family and people there. And the 5th year, you're obligated to eat it at home and enjoy it there and continue on. But the first 3 years, it's considered to be holy. It's a law. Now, the reason that most of us in diaspora don't know about it is because the trees that we are usually eating fruits from are much older than 3 years. However, if we know for sure that the tree is brand new, then we don't eat from it for 3 years. In Israel, they're more careful with it. One of the reasons is because a lot of the trees are not old, because the land lie barren for so many years. And now when Jews started to come back in the 20s, they began to plant, and they're still planting and still planting. But nevertheless, that's there. By the way, there's a Jewish tradition, even though it only affects little boys, because usually boys cut their hair and girls don't. Girls have their own thing at 3 years old, which is to start to light the Shabbat candles. But have you ever heard of the word upsharon or upsharonish, where a little boy doesn't cut his hair for the first 3 years and only after 3 years? One of the reasons is because we're like a tree in the field, and just like you're not permitted to take the fruits from the first 3 years, you don't cut the hair. This is just a little piece of Jewish non-trivia. Okay. Now, here's the interesting thing about Orla. What happens if a farmer grafts a new tree into an old tree? So it's a hybrid tree. Are they subject to the prohibitions of Orla or not? So what is the answer? The answer is very interesting. If the new tree is dependent on the old tree for its growth and for its nutrients and its fruits, then it is not obligated in the mitzvah of Orla, because you consider all of its fruits as an extension of the old tree. But if the young tree is self-reliant, then even though it was grafted, you have to give the Orla. How do you know if it is or it isn't? So here we again read a very strange section of the Talmud. This is called the Jerusalem Talmud. Take it at the way it is, but let's read it. It's page 16, text 8. Okay? How can one determine whether the young tree is self-reliant? It wasn't the first Bibi. Rabbi Bibi said, that was actually, his name was Bivi, but I don't know why they translated it as Bibi. Rabbi Bivai said in the name of Rabbi Hanina, if the leaves of the young tree are turned inward towards itself, one may be sure that it lives from the old one. If the leaves are turned towards the old tree, one may be sure that the young one is self-sustaining. Why? Rabbi Yudan bar Chanan said, here is a sign, one who eats from their friend is ashamed to look at them. What does that mean? That if you're a receiver and you're asking for something, you don't feel comfortable in the face of the one that's giving to you. So this is what it's saying. But the point, what are we learning over here? We're learning over here that there is this concept that one tree gives to another tree. And this brings us to some very, very interesting concepts that we will soon see. Let's go through the graphics. Basically, we have to produce even if our needs are met. So, in other words, when you take the two trees together, they will still produce even though one already has. So there's a concept of production that even if you have a lot of money, you still want to produce because that's the way we're wired to do. Furthermore, the Talmud makes another statement that even if you're handed a lot of stuff, you still want to have your own. Give a look at this statement on page 17, text 9. It's a very, very famous quote from the Talmud. A person prefers one measure of their own over 9 measures of their friends. So let me give you an example. If you have a chance to bake challah for Shabbat, or you have a chance to buy store-bought challah, somebody brings you a gift of 9 challahs from a bakery, and you had just baked your own loaf. Which one will you actually dig in first? Which one will you cut open first for the Friday night service? I think it's a non-question, your own. Because the nature of people is not in the quantity, but in something that was done with their own hands, something that they themselves made and they themselves built. Even if it's not as professional what a professional person did, but if it's their own handiwork, they get satisfaction out of it. Why? Because the nature, we're wired that we want to produce. That's why you find a lot of people that would rather do things themselves. It's not just to save money, because a lot of times they don't save money. A lot of times time is money, but they want to do it because there is a certain satisfaction. We want to be productive. It's very interesting that the truth of the matter is the same thing when people come into a lot of money. So if they use the money in a way that they can be productive and they can endow people that are doing good things and help them do what they're doing, they get a certain satisfaction out of it because that makes them productive. But if all they'll do is just put the money in investments so that they can live with greater wealth and greater riches, they're not going to be happy, as we're soon going to see as an example. So we always find that if someone has a baby and the grandmother knits them a little sweater, and you can buy one at the local department store for much less money, and it might have a classic design to it. Which one is more important to you? Or if you knitted it yourself, there's no question that what you do on your own is more important. There's another thing that the Talmud speaks about. It's called bread of shame. I don't know if you ever heard of it. Namad Chsufa. Namad Chsufa means bread of shame. What is bread of shame? Is when someone has to go out and beg for bread. So when somebody, this is the real reason why it says in Proverbs, we spoke about Proverbs, the one who hates gifts lives long, because they have their self-pride. They have their own humanity in themselves. If all they want is gifts from someone else, then they've lost their humanity. They've lost their pride. So to be productive themselves is much more powerful than receiving something for free from someone else. This is a very major concept if you think about it, because I'm invested in it. It's mine. I have done it. I have produced it. So I will, unless the product that I produce is so bad that you can't consume it. But I'm saying in general, if someone does something for themselves, they enjoy it because they want to be productive. They also, as we're soon going to see, have a certain amount of satisfaction when they see others that do it. Which this brings us to the next thing, and that is the idea of, there's an exercise here on page 17, and that measures our production. The other thing is giving. This is quite powerful. There was a story that the Talmud says that there was a very wealthy king that was always very sad. And he hired an advisor who, the task of the advisor was to find ways how to make him happy. So he started bringing entertainers and clowns and all kinds of shtick. And the king remained very, very sad. And one day the king took a walk incognito. And as he was walking down the street, he saw a man struggling to carry a load up the stairs to his house. So he said to the man, "Perhaps I can help you." And the man said, "Sure." Now, he didn't know that it was the king. Now, the king has never lifted weights in his life because he was a prince and then he was a king. He didn't have to do any of the work. Everybody was doing it for him. This is the first time he actually lifted a load for someone else. And as he was carrying up, all of a sudden, he was overcome with a sense of happiness and fulfillment because he never experienced it. There's also a story with Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi. It's not in the text, but I still want to tell it to you because it's a very powerful story. Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, he was a great scholar. He was one of the greatest scholars in his generation. He lived in the 18th century. He wrote many books, and his scholarly level was beyond. It's a source of the whole Chabad movement. And when you study his stuff, you just see that he was a giant in Jewish law, Jewish philosophy, Jewish theology. But yet he would take time to raise money for two causes. One was to marry off poor orphans that had no money. And the second thing was that if there were people that were imprisoned, they were in debtor's prison, he would try to raise money to pay off their debt to get them out of prison. So he took time out of his precious moments of study, and he would go do that. So one time he came to a town, and there was a very, very wealthy man, a Jewish man, very, very wealthy. And he asked about him, and people say, "Don't bother going there because he's a cheapskate, he's a miser, he's not going to give you anything." Reb Shneir Zalman said, "I'm going to go to him." So he knocks on the door. The wealthy man is very kind, takes him into the house, sits down, and he says, "What is this famous rabbi here for?" And he starts to say the story that there's a young orphan girl that lost both of her parents, and she's now about to get married. She doesn't have a penny to her name. And he was raising money to help her get married and set up her house. And it was a very emotional story. And the man became so passionate about it. He said, "I'm going to help you." And he says, "Just wait a minute." He goes into the study and he comes out and he gives him a coin. And the coin was a penny. Rabbi Shneir Zalman looked at the penny and he said, "Wow, thank you so much. This is wonderful that you're able to take from your money and give it for the cause." The people that were with him were bewildered. I mean, this is such an insult. This great rabbi comes and he's, pleading the case for the poor, and all he gets is a penny. And the rabbi couldn't stop praising the wealthy man for the warm feeling that he had that he helped him. And he took the penny lovingly and he carried it out and he walked out of the house. 5 minutes later, the wealthy man is chasing him. He says, "Come back. I have some more for you." And then he gave him more. And as every time he left, he called him back until he gave him the entire sum that he needed. So everybody was wondering what was going on here. So the Rebbe explained to his people, he said, this man never knew the taste of what it means to give. That's why he was a miser. And he can only bring himself to give 1 penny. And people, knowing that he was so wealthy, felt so offended that they threw it back in his face until they didn't come to him. Today, I gave him the opportunity to feel good what it means to give something of himself. And he was so overcome with that good feeling that it inspired him to give him more and more and more. In other words, that there was a good feeling that was there. So here we find a story which brings out a similar concept. So there was a great rabbi in the days of the Talmud. His name was Rabbi Nachman. He's quoted a lot in the Talmud. And he lived in Babylonia. He was quite wealthy. He was also politically well connected. And he came from Jewish aristocracy. One time, he hosted a rabbi that came from Israel who was very poor, but very, very scholarly. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak. So he came to Rabbi Nachman's house. They dined together. They spoke words of Torah. Before going their ways, Rabbi Nachman, who's the wealthy host, turns to Rabbi Yitzchak and he says, I have a request. What was the request? So let's look what the Talmud says. Page 19, text 10. You got it? So then when taking leave from one another, Rabbi Nachman said to Rabbi Yitzchak, Master, give me a blessing. Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, I will tell you a parable. This situation is comparable to a person who was walking through a desert and was hungry, tired, and thirsty. All of a sudden, he finds a lush tree whose fruits were sweet and whose shade was pleasant, and a stream of water flowed beneath it. He ate from the fruits of the tree, drank from the water in the stream, and sat in the shade of the tree. And the way the story goes, he fell asleep and he was refreshed. When he wished to leave, he says to the tree, Tree, with what shall I bless you? If I say to you that your fruit should be sweet, your fruits are already sweet. If I say to you your shade should be pleasant, your shade is already pleasant. If I say that a stream of water should flow beneath you, a stream of water already flows beneath you. Rather, I will bless you as follows. May it be God's will that all the saplings that they plant from you be like you. So it is with you, Rabbi Yitzchak continues. With what shall I bless you? If I bless you with Torah, you already have Torah. If I bless you with wealth, you already have wealth. If I bless you with children, you already have children. Rather, may it be God's will that your offspring should be like you. So we've learned until now the importance of growth, self-improvement, and all of that. But what we're learning over here is the idea of productivity, being productive. And what does it mean, productive? Productive means that we allow not only ourselves to benefit from it, but others. And in this case, it was the children, the saplings, the other generations that they also gained from it. The greatest joy to parents and grandparents, especially to grandparents, is when they see their grandchildren being raised in the proper way by their children. There's nothing that brings more satisfaction to grandparents and to parents as well, who eventually become grandparents, because that means that you are productive in a way that you trained. You know, there was a story that there was a father that gave away weeks before the wedding of his son to make sure that he's all set up. And he went with him and he bought him suits and he got him a house and he got him furniture. He took care of him with everything that he needed until the day that he got married. On the day that he got married, he went into his son and he says, Son, you're about to walk to the wedding canopy. How are you going to pay me for everything that I've done for you? So what did the son answer? The son said, Dad, I will do for my child exactly what you did for me. And when the father heard that, he embraced him and kissed him, and he said, that's what I wanted to hear. Because it means that he led an example and that his son was able to learn not to be selfish, but when it comes to the next generation, that he should be able to replicate that and give as well. So this is something which is very important in the idea of giving and being productive. We don't have that many readings left, but let's just wrap it up. We have another few things to do. Are we good? Everybody awake? Okay, good. What? It's a little warm in here. That's why I'm saying. So this is what's called existential mattering. Meaning in life means that you matter. What does it mean you matter? Matter doesn't mean that you have fame. Matter doesn't mean that everybody is treating you as a celebrity, because that's nonsense. What does matter? So these two people write, Joshua Hicks and Laura King write the following. There is great comfort in believing that your life and actions matter in the grand scheme of things. This conviction is referred to as existential mattering, and is a strong component of the experience of meaning in life. While the concept of existential mattering often evokes images of famous or infamous people who have done extraordinary things in their life, many people gain a sense of mattering through avenues more easily traversed. Research shows that the feeling that you have made a positive influence on others is unsurprisingly almost associated with the belief that your life is meaningful. Existential mattering is often rooted in the sense that you matter to others, from helping strangers in need and providing social support to loved ones, or simply being a reliable friend. So this concept that if someone comes to you and they need advice, or someone is brokenhearted, or someone just needs a lift or a pep talk, and you give them the pep talk, what do you get out of it? You don't get anything out of it, but you matter. And you should know that that is more satisfying than anything else that a person can do, as we're soon going to see. There's a very famous story with Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was one of the great sages who lived in Israel in the time of the Mishnah, and he studied and taught Torah when the Romans prohibited it. And finally, they caught up with him and they arrested him. His student, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the very famous rabbi that we celebrate Lag BaOmer for, the author of the Zohar, came to visit him in prison. And he says, Rebbe, teach me some Torah. But Rabbi Akiva was afraid because the Romans were there and you weren't allowed to study Torah. And he says, please teach me something. So he taught him the following statement in text 12, page 22. Rabbi Akiva responded, my son, more than the calf desires to nurse, the cow wants to give milk. What is this talking about? That more than the recipient wants to receive, the giver wants to give. And the giving that wants to give means because you want to feel that you're contributing to someone else in the world, in the society. And that's the way God created the world. God created the world that every person is both a giver and a receiver. There's no such thing as a person who's only a giver, and there's no such thing that the person is only a receiver. We do both. We give and we receive. And our greatest satisfaction is to give more than to receive. Because when we give, we feel like we're making a difference in the world. Which brings us to a few interesting readings. The Midrash says that King David, who was very worried about the fate of his people in Israel, he was the father of King Solomon, and he wanted to make sure that everybody was living happy. It wasn't achieved until his son took over the kingship. It's a separate story why God made the blessing only for King Solomon and not for King David. One of the reasons is that King David, in order to establish the independence of Israel, was fighting wars, and God said that even though you fought the wars and you did the right thing, but nevertheless, since you have blood on your hands, the actual peace will come with your son who never conducted war. But anyway, so King David was turning to God. Let's see how it's brought down in text 13, page 22. King David says to God, Master of the universe, establish equity in your world by making the rich and poor the same. It's a proper argument. We're saying to God, why do you have discrepancies? Some people are wealthy and some people are poor. And yeah, a lot of people work hard. And as we mentioned many times, there are some people that work equally hard, but they can't really produce, they can't make money. And someone else can work as hard or less, and everything they do is successful. So what does God reply? He says, if that were the case, who will preserve kindness and truth? If all were rich or all were poor, who would be able to do acts of kindness? What does this mean? Think about it for a second. On the surface, it sounds like it's not fair. But on the other hand, if you think about the way the world was created, There has to be the interaction. Now, the interaction here actually is that we think that the wealthy man is the giver and the poor person is the recipient. And Rabbi Akiva taught us just the opposite, that the wealthy person is the recipient because the satisfaction that he gets, that he feels meaningful, is even more than the poor person. However, the Talmud says that even the poor are not exempt. This is an interesting law in the Code of Jewish Law, page 23. Everyone is obligated to give charity. Even a poor person who relies on charitable support themselves must give from what they receive, because everybody has to be a giver. Giving is part of who we are. Now, you would think about it because in our country, if someone is below the poverty level, they're exempt from taxes. You would say charity is just like taxes. Charity has nothing to do with taxes. Charity is the idea that we're partners with God. God gives you the wealth on behalf of God so that you should be able to use it wisely and be able to spread it and give it to those that need. If people decide not to give, then they might forfeit the wealth that they got from God, and God will give it to someone else. So the point of the matter is that everybody has to become a partner, and there has to be giving. So it goes back to this idea of being productive. The final piece is about relationships. And with this, we're going to finish the first class. I'm going to ask a question. If I'm going to take a poll of most people in this room and ask you, what would be the best reward that if someone can give you a reward, let's say you reached a milestone or you reached a particular birthday and they want to give you a gift certificate, and what is going to be your answer? What would be your gift? Can we take an example? A sample. Nothing bad, only good things. I know what I would answer. I would answer, get me a cottage on a mountaintop in isolation from everybody, where I can just hear the birds and hear the flow of water and be in isolation. And that is my relaxation. The truth of the matter is that that is not true. That's coming from my animal soul. It's not coming from my human soul. Because true happiness comes from good relationships. Good relationships is what makes us who we are. We spoke before about loneliness. The loneliness comes when there is a lack of relationship. So this is an interesting write-up from Emily Smith. She says in text 15, page 25, if you ask people what their most significant source of meaning in life are, they perhaps unsurprisingly list their close relationship, because that's one of the pillars of a meaningful life, is a sense of belonging. When people feel like they belong, according to psychologists Mark Leary and Roy Baumeister, it's because they're in a relationship with others based on mutual care. This is the idea of belonging. Yeah, we want to have a relaxation every once in a while, and we want to have quiet. That's fine, just like we got to go to sleep. But that's not what gives us satisfaction, just a break from all the noise. The true satisfaction is when we have a community, when we have a relationship, when we have a relationship with our children, we have a relationship with our parents, we have a relationship with our spouse, we have a relationship with our friends, that we feel that we're part of a group. And that is the way God created us. And we have to work on that. And this goes back to the roots, as we're going to see in a minute. But before we go there, we're going to show a video in a minute that brings it all together. In the previous JLI, we talked about one of the great converts to Judaism who translated the Torah in Aramaic. His name was Onkelos. And Onkelos was very, very careful with his translation. And we find a lot of marvelous words that he says, which gives meaning to the Hebrew. Here's one interesting thing, one interesting example. Page 25, text 16a. This comes again from Genesis. God formed the human from the dust of the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living being. When you look at Onkelos' translation, he translates it in 16b, and God created man dust from the earth, and he breathed into his nostrils a soul of life, and the human became a speaking spirit. Amamala. and this is one of the differences between science and Torah. Science says there are three categories. There's the mineral, there's the vegetable, and the animal. And the human is just a sophisticated animal. The Torah says, no, there's a fourth level, which is the highest level, which is the human. But when they talk about the human, they don't say that the human is an intellectual. They say the human is a communicator through speech. They can take ideas and articulate it to other people. And that is the most important thing because that creates community. And the Rambam actually jumps on it. And the Rambam in text 17 says, human beings are social by nature, and their nature compels them to gather together with others. They are not like other living creatures which have no necessity to congregate unless they want to attack prey. Rather, their nature requires social gathering as an absolute necessity. So this idea of relationships is very, very important. So even though our tendency is that we're sometimes maxed out with the noise, and so many people want things from us, that's not really called a relationship. A relationship means that you have a trusted person that you can really feel comfortable with, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a family member, and you can connect with them. What I want to do next is play a video which brings all these concepts together. A little loud.
We live in an age of unprecedented freedom. Go anywhere, do anything, and still hollow inside. Comfort surrounds us, warmer homes, softer beds, but comfort alone doesn't satisfy the soul. Wealth is at an all-time high, packages always arriving, gadgets galore, and yet so many feel empty. Security has never been higher. Passwords, alerts, cameras everywhere, and still, anxiety is at an all-time high. So if security, wealth, comfort, and freedom can't fill us, what can? The Torah says we're like trees. Want to feel alive? Watch the tree. Here are 4 lessons. A tree never stops growing. We're the same. Our souls crave steady inner growth. Trees are productive. Just look at their fruit. We're wired like that too. We feel fulfilled when we generate sweet, lasting, meaningful deeds. Fruit isn't for the tree, it's for giving. Our souls are the same. We feel deep joy specifically when we share and care. A tree intertwines its roots with other trees, lending each other support. We need that too. Relationships are our source of strength. True freedom is growth. True comfort is productivity. True wealth is giving. True security is in relationships. So feed your soul and watch your life bloom.
So, meaning is found when we align our core with our human capacity. We have the growth that we talked about. Growth can be achieved through study. Growth can be achieved through service. Growth could be achieved just as spirit rising. Productivity. Productivity we talked about before, making things in our life and making it in a way that we feel accomplished. And then there's giving, which giving gives us greater satisfaction. And then there is relationships. Now, there is still something deeper which we didn't address because we didn't have time, and we will address it in the next class. Because really, this is only an intro to the most important ingredient in finding meaning, and that's called purpose. When we have purpose, then we have meaning. If we don't have purpose, we don't have meaning. And how do we find what our purpose is, and how do we achieve that? Stay tuned, because that's what we will explore and examine together next Tuesday night, same time, same station. Thank you very much. If anyone has any questions, please feel free. It was so nice having you, and I hope this is a good inspiration for the future. Good?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you
Hey,
very much.
Rabbi, can we, how do we send you questions?
You can send an email at rabbi@chabadnc.org. Rabbi@chabadnc.org. That is the way you can do it. Let me stop the recording.